We want to welcome all of you back to our Love More series. And with us today to discuss combating racism in healthcare is Dr. Obi Ugwonali. Dr. Ugwonali is a double board certified orthopedic surgeon. He is a leadership partner at Peachtree Orthopedics in Atlanta. He has 3 children, is active in community, is also an entrepreneur and founder of, Obi, this list could go on, Dr. Ugwonali, I should say. But let's dive in deep to see if we can help people find some solutions as we work to combat and solve racism in healthcare. Talk to me about that. Why is it that in some ways, many people are just sort of hearing about it? We've known for years the stats, for example, on women and disparities for women of color who their mortality rates in birth and childcare are very different than Caucasian women. Talk to me about why you think the awakening is now.
Well, thanks for having me, Sarah. This is a very important topic. I believe that people are more aware of it, mainly because of all the things that have happened recently. We witnessed George Floyd and then a couple of other high-profile cases, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Cooper, the list goes on and on. But recently, we were confronted with these incidences back to back, and a lot of these folks we could identify with. We could identify with George Floyd with his begging to be alive right in front of our eyes. So this was not something that it could be debated, well, did it happen? How did it happen? So I think people were made aware of some of these issues, and that kind of led to these kind of discussions about, this problem that has been part of the problem that has faced the African American community that unfortunately not a lot of people have been aware of in the past. So I'm really glad that we're able to discuss these issues now openly.
And so in discussing them, let's first think about you and in medical school. We're learning more that even in medical school, there are disparities, whether it's in learning how to treat people. Perhaps for a long time, textbooks were just giving examples of Caucasians in textbooks. In your experience and what you're seeing, are you seeing a change in medical school? And what else can we do to perhaps change some unconscious bias there?
Well, Sarah, since I graduated from medical school over 21 years ago, I'm not sure how things are changing. I know that recently a UK medical student by the name of Malone Mukwende was featured on social media because he took it upon himself to write a dermatology book to depict how the skin conditions would look like on a dark skin, because all the books that he was using in his UK medical school only used textbooks that were written based on white skin to teach the entire medical school. So he became tired of asking all the time, how does this look like in a dark skin like mine? So, and then he took action and wrote a textbook. So unfortunately, Sarah, it will take individuals like Malone Mukwende to take on these tasks unless medical schools make a conscious effort to overhaul textbooks, to overhaul their ways of teaching, and to make sure that medical students are getting a well-rounded education.
And would you include in that perhaps a greater understanding about what patients might be experiencing, meaning not treating patients with a presumption of them, but diving more into them as individuals, knowing their individual story?
That is absolutely correct, Sarah. The answer to your question is yes. Unfortunately, it's still overt racism, and I think a better knowledge of the history of African Americans as it relates to their relationship with our healthcare system, would help, first of all, for doctors to understand what barriers that they may encounter in treating their patients, and also an understanding of their own internal biases and how those things could play into how they are able to treat their patients effectively or ineffectively.
Well, and so as we look at, say, a bias from a doctor or surgeon's perspective, what about bias that comes from a patient perspective? How do we work to change that? You know, in reading and researching, it's astounding to hear many stories about the fact that when a qualified, remarkable surgeon or doctor of color walks in a room and a patient says, I want somebody else. How can we work better to change that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in everything, Sarah, it's about people being comfortable with who is treating them. I'm actually not against people wanting a certain type of person to treat them. I think that's fine, because ultimately as a doctor, I want someone to be comfortable with me. I want them to really want to come to see me because of my medical knowledge. But if they're not comfortable because of my race or color, that's fine. But I feel that in order to keep things like that from happening, people need to start to have a better understanding of appreciation of people outside of their own comfort zone, people that they can relate to, people they grew up with. So I think making a conscious effort in whatever new social setting to reach out to that person that is outside your race or social class, to get to know them, so that we can start to break that barrier that prevents people from wanting to understand how other people are, and therefore appreciating that someone that is not their skin color can treat them just as effectively as someone that is their skin color.
What a powerful thing to say, because it makes me think that one of the things perhaps that each individual can do is, as you said, think about who they're surrounding themselves with. If all of my kids' teachers are the same color, if all of my doctors are the same color, including my dentist, my OBGYN, plus my community, the reflection needs to start as a whole to make that change. And is there not an intentional, conscious intentional decision to just pick the same, but if I'm doing it, I need to be aware of it so I can pivot. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Sarah. Unfortunately, we are a product of a systemic, a system that has kind of, in a way, driven us apart. So you have folks cluster in different parts of town, different churches, different schools, that actually makes us maybe even more segregated now than we were in the past. So we therefore lose that natural ability to interact with people outside of our race, our comfort zone. So in order for us all to solve that problem, we have to be very conscientious or intentional about making that effort to reach out, to get to know folks outside of your race, so that when that situation comes and you're confronted by a person of color as your doctor, you feel comfortable in knowing that these types of folks are, similar to me, just different skin color, but have a story, and likely will have the ability to take care of me as effectively as someone else who may not be of my race. And this applies to not just white people, applies to Black people, Asians, whatever your race may be. Just making that effort to expose yourself whenever you can, because unfortunately our system, the system that we live in, has been successful enough in separating us and keeping us apart, and limiting the ability of some of us as we grow up and move on to become adults, don't have as much exposure to others as would be necessary to become fully enlightened.
Yes, and if we don't start now, I mean, if it's never too late, because if you don't start now, when is it ever going to happen?
That is correct.
And we recognize, don't we, Dr. Ugwonali, that it's a brave choice, right? It's brave to say maybe that you're going to switch doctors. And so that whole new practice might be very different for you, but do it anyway. And I like the way you're saying research, make sure you're comfortable with the doctor, be it man or woman, their experience, their expertise, but try not to stay on the same path that we've always done. And that, my friend, is such a powerful way for us to love more. In this thinking through of the difficulties and complexities and the systemic nature of racism in healthcare, talk to me a bit about how you think other factors play into the racism. socioeconomic factors, things of that nature. Are they relevant, or are we just needing to only talk about healthcare itself?
Well, you cannot talk about healthcare without talking about the effects of socioeconomic, factors on healthcare. Um, Up until 1899, the popular teaching, was that we were all born with innate biological differences between races. It was only in 1899 that W.E.B. Du Bois, a sociologist, clearly pointed out that people's economic status, living conditions were actually more of a factor in determining health outcomes. And then recently, scientific studies have confirmed that our innate biological differences is not the main determinant of health outcomes, and that socioeconomic factors, whether or not you live in a school district that allowed you to get a good education, to whether or not you are able to live in a neighborhood that has outdoor areas where you can go out and exercise, whether or not you feel comfortable in an area that you feel safe to go out and exercise in order to better your health, and ultimately whether or not you even have enough money to have health insurance and therefore the proper health care, and finally the proper food to live a healthy life. So you cannot talk about healthcare without all of those socioeconomic factors that ultimately lead to the health of our community.
And part of all of that, and as we look at it, we have to acknowledge, in order to heal, that much of it is broken. And so if we take just a component of education, I want to look to you. I mean, you are brilliant and just doing phenomenal things within your career and otherwise. But tell us how you got there, because it's pretty amazing that you weren't born in the United States. And you didn't just go to any schools in the United States, you went to the top schools. Take us through that a little bit.
Yes, Sarah. Yes, you're right. I was born in Nigeria. I came to the U.S. at age 9. We actually migrated because my father, who was a member of the Nigerian government, came. His intention was to come and get his higher education and go back, but with the instabilities with the government, and therefore the education for his children, we all decided to migrate here and stay here permanently. And then from moving to Texas, I then went to boarding school in the Northeast, and then after that went to Stanford, where I did my undergraduate. The boarding school is Phillips Academy, Andover. And then from Stanford, I went to Yale School of Medicine, where I did my medical school, and then Columbia University for my orthopedic surgery residency, and then finally went to Harvard for my fellowship before coming to Atlanta about 14 years ago to join Peachtree Orthopedics.
So you've been this person of excellence and perseverance and hard work, and it can't have been an easy path. Those are not easy institutions. Life itself is not easy for anybody. What do you think was put in you to have such a fervor for education? And in relation to that question, how long did you know that you wanted to be a doctor, or even diving deeper to become a surgeon?
Yes, Sarah. I think I'm blessed, first of all, for having incredible parents that, brought me into this earth, and the fact that, they valued education, and really growing up, that's all we talked about. That's all we knew. And I think having moved from my original country to now the United States, there was a sense that there is an opportunity to grow, and that there's an open possibility for me to pursue whatever I want. And again, going back to my parents, very fortunate that they encouraged that, they supported that. And it wasn't easy, but to have that background where you have your whole family network supporting you in that endeavor really helped me achieve what I've achieved so far.
As a father and also as a surgeon, what do you think that it does to a child who is dreaming, who maybe doesn't have the education support that you did, who now is seeing once again, there's a malady, there's a problem within community, and that more people of color are dealing with COVID and dealing with this pain. So in other words, just being yourself, the journey might be a bit harder. What can we do? What can we share? How can we be of help to lift each other up in this time when we're more and more aware of added disparities?
Yeah, so there are several things that we can do. We talked about understanding that we have innate biases. I think being aware that we have innate biases to choose to be with people who we're comfortable with. So I think starting with that and understanding that is very important. So making sure that whatever it may be, not even just in healthcare, but just in general life, being intentional about using that knowledge to direct the way we hire people, the way we interact with people in our workplaces, in our schools, in our churches, the way we promote people, because ultimately that goes to the whole economic factor that is so critical to the healthcare disparities. Another way, again, is for people to see, to be able to see discrimination or overt racism and speak out about it. Because the saying is you're just as bad as the person who committed that racist act if you don't speak up about it. Ultimately, what that does is that it gives support to the victim of racism or discrimination if they see that someone else is there to support them. And secondly, it gives the perpetrator the opportunity to realize that, what you just said or did is unacceptable. And then that gives them pause to think about it so that next time that they think about doing something like that, they may choose not to do that. And then, finally, I think it goes back to being intentional. It's also being intentional in supporting, in healthcare, organizations that are focusing specifically on bringing changing that health disparity. I think COVID-19 has amplified what we already know, and we saw how it has devastated the African American community, the Latinx community, because these are the communities that are the result of poor socioeconomic status. They're the ones that have the poor health outcomes. And studies have shown that these health disparities, even without COVID, could cost the U.S. healthcare or the U.S. economy $500 billion. So what that means is that we are all paying for it anyway. So why not be intentional about us all improving the health outcomes of all of us? Because ultimately, not only is it a good thing, but it's also a financially beneficial thing to do for all of us in the U.S.
The intentionality is such a poignant word. And so if I'm understanding you correctly, you truly believe that if my family and I decide that we could go and help a local school or help feed some people or help them have better resources to more quality food, those kind of decisions, education, food resources, finding jobs, as you said, elevating a community, all of those intentional decisions can directly impact healthcare?
Absolutely. It could directly impact healthcare and also directly impact all of us. We're all taxpayers, but those efforts could, in the long run, improve the lives of those people so that they are able to fend for themselves, get better health care, and therefore less likely to have all the comorbid conditions, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, that is really the thing that is draining our healthcare system.
And impacts the bottom line for all of us, as you said. When we think about this concept of loving more and being brave about love, and as you said, standing up, speaking out against racism, I thought it was interesting that you talked about giving the person making the racist decisions or statements, giving them a chance to change. And that's a very salient point, but it also makes me think about healthcare. You're telling us as a surgeon to help people heal. How does community play in the healing? For example, you mentioned with your own parents, they loved on you to encourage education, to let you know everything is possible. How do we love more in community?
Again, Sarah, it's about everyone understanding our basic humanity, that we're all the same at the end, and understand that we all have our history that is the reason why we are who we are, and understand, that some of us have had to deal with more discrimination than others, and therefore that has impacted the way they are, the way they are seen, and therefore their health outcomes. So if we can all understand that at the end of the day, we all have the same basic humanity, and that we should love on each other and help each other, because it ultimately benefits all of us at the end.
So as we close, I want you to consider this. With all that's happening, all the uncertainty, all the pain in the world, do you see this as a time of hope and phenomenal opportunity? Or do you feel despair? Where are you? And wherever you are, where should we all go?
Great question. Sarah, I am an optimist by nature. I am extremely optimistic, and I actually even more now than ever. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at what's happened. We take it back to George Floyd and the whole Black Lives Matter movement. In some of the protests that we saw on television, I would say over 90% were not Black people or people of color. So that gives me extreme hope in that the general population has seen the need for us to heal and love each other and help each other, because ultimately it is for the betterment of our whole entire society. So I am extremely optimistic about the future, and I think we just need to continue the dialogue and to continue the intentional acts of doing everything that we can to make sure that we all have the same opportunities to become healthy.
Dr. Ugwonali, I thank you so much for being a part of this program. I hope that we can talk again, because we know that this is just a spark to start, just to get people ignited to realizing that there is great possibility, and how awesome you as a frontline person seeing so much pain also have the ability to say, yes, there is great hope. I thank you for that. I thank you for being such a leader that we can trust and a top doc. And you mentioned rocket science. Between the two of us, there's only one of us here who could be one. Yeah, it's you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I truly respect you and all the work you're doing. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
We encourage all of you out there to continue to talk with us and join us as we work on ways to combat racism, to heal, and to love more. Thank you.